We have a guest joining us in the show for this hour, the very Reverend Canon Dr. Sammy Wainaina, Provost of the All Saints Cathedral. Good morning, Provost.
Good morning, Eric.
Good to have you on the show. Happy New Year.
Oh,
imagine.
Yes.
Oh, in March.
As long as we haven't seen you this year.
All right.
The year is new.
Okay. It's very Kenyan.
That's very Kenyan.
Happy New Year.
Very good.
Good.
The man called C.T. Muga has the day's proverb. This week's proverbs are from Uganda. Today's proverb is a story and an admonition.
Yes. You are ripped off in the market, but you're arguing about it on the road and carrying on.
You're ripped off in the market.
You leave the marketplace, you're walking away from the market.
Where the ripping happened.
Where the ripping took place, and you are busy arguing and talking and really ranting about the ripping off at the market as you keep moving further and further away from it. Yes.
Dr. Wainaina, this one. What do you think the Ugandan people are saying?
You don't go ranting away from the market. You shout there. You
Deal with it there.
deal with it there. We don't run away from problems.
Deal with it where it's happening.
Yeah.
At that particular point. Yeah.
Otherwise, people will confuse you to be mad. But if you say here was the place and this is the person, then people can help you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you relate it to today's world? The happening in our country, in Nigeria or other places.
That's very provocative. But that can happen in the political circles, religious circles. Look at what is happening now with some business on Thika Road and all these things. Yeah, you wonder why is the government playing politics with such matters. Yet they knew. They give licenses. Yeah, so the owners should ask, what's the problem?
The people who give trade licenses, who register companies and all, cannot now turn back and say, no. Kenyans
and
can't
when
sell
people
these
import, they pay taxes. Yeah, so mention the person who raped you there. Yes.
things. And deal with it at that
And dealing
point.
with it.
Deal with that person there.
Yes.
Okay.
I hope
The message is home.
it's contextual.
You are here because we want to discuss why the church has a duty to speak truth to power. And when we were talking about this earlier, City asked, duty or mandate?
Well, those are semantics. Whether you call it duty or even a calling, it boils down to the same. Yes, if maybe I can dive in. Let's start from the biblical point of view. Then we look at the history of the church and politics,
Okay.
but also look at our modern times. In the Bible, when God always raised a king, there was a prophet, and the vice versa. And it tells you about the place of power, religious and political, is very important in influencing the daily happenings of society. And the reason why God did that was to have a balance between political power and religious power, without which then one can be toxic, can be excessive. But now the challenge is when now the two come together and collude, then it becomes what I have said in other forums, cultic, and it's dangerous. So the church require the political regulation, but the political requires the religious regulation. And even looking at the history of the church and politics, where the church has become part of the government, it becomes very dangerous. It becomes part of the oppressor. Because government can be oppressive.
Yep.
But also where churches have not been regulated, there is no difference between religious or political power. when it is not under control. And that's why we speak to one another. We regulate one another. We have done, Kenya has many examples during different dispensations. The Kenyatta era, you can see the difference between the church and government, and what the church, the role that the church played. If you look at the Moi era, there are churches that were deemed to be too close to power, and they benefited a lot from that. While there are others, like where I come from, that suffered, some people almost died, but it became the only...
Some died.
Some died.
Bishop Alexander moved.
Yes, it became the place of agitation and seeking for freedom. Then the Kibaki era, Mzee was open to church, was independent of church at the same time. Now, the Uhuru era, we grappled with big problems that I know, and I was in this studio speaking about them. And now the new one, and the challenges that have come. So, church and politics.
What challenges are you seeing in the new one?
And this started during the campaigns, where one leader was made to look like an angel, like a Messiah, a Christian,
Anointed of the Lord.
Yes, and so that was the wave in which he came into power, what you would call the evangelical tide. And then you have the other person who was made to look like the devil, anti-church, anti-Christ, the enemy of the church. And that is very dangerous when church labels, stigmatizes people. So somebody comes into power, then feeling entitled, and easily there is mix of political and religious powers, definitely for the benefit of both. And that's where I have said, hey, stop. That is not right. Step out. The church should be close enough to commend where people do well, but also far enough to tell them that is wrong. The moment you bring the two together, again, to repeat the word, cultic happens, and cultic power is very dangerous because it is one person who is too powerful to influence you. Their word becomes the law, and when you challenge such, then you are seen to be the enemy of the establishment.
Provost, I know we've asked this question before. I mean, we've had conversations about then the separation of church from state. If we look at what's currently happening in Kenya, there has been a complete embracing of the church.
Sure.
And it's not shied upon. It's not shunned. And the present administration has said they will go with the church into matters of leadership. There will be prayer. There will be all of this. If this is happening, can we say really that there is separation? Number one. Number two, in your opinion, or from what you see, then does it muddy the waters in terms of the position then that the church should take to do some of these things that you speak of?
Well, it's also good to understand when we talk about the church, because the church is not one denomination.
Yes.
If the government wanted to work with the church, surely even the other regimes have worked with the church. But the church is organized in a way that you have bodies that are regulated. You have the NCCK, the EAK, the Kenya Catholic Bishops Conference. All these are very important bodies that if you really wanted to engage with the church, you would use such forums to engage with the church. But when the government takes a certain religious persuasion, it's like against the others. I'm here and I can speak openly. I have never been invited in those meetings. And where somebody is sent to ask me to come and be part of the congregation, I've asked them, So what is the agenda on the table? What am I coming to do? I represent a church, and a significant church for that matter in the city. So you can't just tell me to come and attend a service. I won't mobilize people to something that I don't know what I'm getting the church
In
into.
what kind of meetings have you been invited?
Well,
What kind of meetings?
mostly it's not the planning meetings. Mostly it is, we are meeting in this stadium, and please could you come, or mobilize members of the cathedral to come. And I've said, no, I can't do that. Unless,
Why? Because you are not involved in the planning?
Well, yes, because I don't know what is on the table. What are we committing ourselves to? If members of the cathedral asked me, what is the purpose for such prayer? And in Kenya, we need to be careful with the word prayer or fellowship or thanksgiving, because they are not religious terms per se. They are political terms.
Wait. For example, we had a national prayer at Nyayo Stadium.
What do you mean with national?
Okay, hold on. This was called what it was called. A national prayer.
It
at
was
Nyayo Stadium.
called.
It was seen and it was televised, and prayers were being conducted. Were you invited for that meeting?
No, that one I wasn't.
If you had been invited, would you have gone?
No, I wouldn't have gone.
Why?
Because I don't know the reason for...
To pray for rain for the country.
Oh. If it doesn't rain, does that mean Kenya is not a godly country?
No, does it mean we should not rain? We should not pray?
We should pray, and we can pray. In fact, by the way, I've been in public saying, if you really want prayers, ask the churches to pray on Sunday. And we'll pray across the country, across all denominations. It's the easiest.
In fact, if I may add to what the Provost is saying, what stops the leadership from simply saying, on Monday at 10 o'clock, could the entire country stop for 1 minute?
And pray.
And pray. 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Just wherever you are, stop. 1 minute. And
Yeah.
pray.
There are many ways to pray.
That is telling the entire country to pray. And they will pray.
But also, city, the government should never organize prayers. That's not their mandate.
It is not.
No. Ask the church to organize prayers. And as the leadership, the political leadership, join in. But now look, and let's use Nakuru rally, for example. It is 4 hours of prayer
Thanksgiving.
and thanksgiving.
Yes.
Then you use an hour to do the sermon and prayers. Then after that, 3 hours of politicking and doing the same sermon. And then the clergy are there seated, entertained. Even one of them saying we should revenge. Even saying, arrest me, let me be in prison so that by the time this guy comes, I can deal with him. And clergy are there entertained, and they can't stand to, I wouldn't, either I will walk out or I'll go to the podium and say, it is either a prayer meeting or a political meeting.
This sounds to me, Canon, that it's a difference between these two clear divides of denominations in church. I don't know what you call them. The evangelicals and the ecumenicals or whatever. What are they?
Denominations.
Yes, the denominations. So there are those that, of course, what do you call the mainstream ones? The Anglican, the Catholic,
The main churches.
the main churches, and then the other churches. This sounds like it's a divide that you're clearly putting into here
But Eric, mainstream.
and saying. Not about mainstream. I'm not going for mainstream. You know what I'm talking about.
I do. But you know, I'm using the word mainstream. Very many of the churches that were hitherto referred to as fringe are mainstream now.
Yes, but there are different. There's a difference in the way people worship in the Anglican Church, in PCA, and the Pentecostal Church. This is the word I was looking for, right? And there's the last time you were here, you told us about, those, they're either called, I don't know, evangelical or Pentecostal or whatever. Basically,
and that's what City is trying to...
It's the difference between those churches that have the mutaratara kind and those ones that are Pentecostal. And I see that this is... I'm detecting that there's a clear divide on how you approach prayer, how you approach service, how you approach conduct of service. And what you're raising here is the difference that you see. between us and how we conduct our services. When we come in, we run our program this way, and those ones, when they go in, they run their program that way, and they mix even with speeches.
Eric, you may have a point, but let me just add to what you're saying. You raise a valid point. The so-called churches that were referred to as mainstream, you are talking about the Presbyterian Church, the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church. The church isn't the bishop, the church isn't the provost, the church isn't the priest who's standing before you. It's a setup with serious checks and balances. The churches that you speak of, which are evangelical, the bishops are everything. They are more or less the church. What they say tends to go.
See,
the check and balance.
You belong to the other side.
Oh no.
You don't see the order in those churches.
Actually, there is order, but it is there for everyone to see that the people who lead those churches are everything. They literally are everything. You may have deacons, you may have elders, but believe me, what they say is what goes.
But Latif, so that we don't lose the point.
Yes.
The way people worship will always be diverse. Whether you go free, whether you use a prayer book, whatever, those are services, and they start on time. They start and they end at a particular. So don't worry about that. But here, when we are talking about national issues, the church is structured. Even all those churches, like are owned by individuals, they are under an umbrella body. And that's where we need to structure the church. Because if we don't regulate ourselves through those bodies, then likely then the government can come like what has happened in Rwanda. Because of the chaos that can be created by the religion in the name of God. People can cause a lot of chaos. The other day we were talking about regulating the volume of sound that can cause so much trouble. I remember I had a church in my neighborhood, and I had to walk there and told them, hey, hello.
Louder doesn't mean it's going to reach heaven.
No, and so not only that, if it's your kesha, it's your kesha alone. So don't think I'm ungodly because I'm telling you this. So self-regulation is very important. But for matters that are political, I think it's good to look at them from a historical point of view. There are churches like what City calls the mainstream churches, which have known the art of relating with government, but at the same time being separated. Now, the churches that we are calling, and again, I don't want to emphasize on the divide, the evangelical or Pentecostals, maybe they have never been very close to power, and this time they succeeded maybe in bringing one of their own, and so they really feel entitled. That is very dangerous, and that's where we are.
Let them enjoy their shine, Provost.
You know, if you have to go down history, what the very Reverend, the Provost, is saying is something that what we refer to as the mainstream churches, not only enjoyed. Church and state in the history were one thing.
They controlled.
Yeah, they were one thing. It's like one was the arm of the other. And that's the history. And they learnt. Maybe.
We have burned our fingers.
Yes, seriously.
We have.
Maybe our brothers and sisters are now going to go through that process of burning their fingers to learn and get to the point where the other churches got to. There is a reason why the lessons that have been learnt brought about the dictum of separation of state and church. There's a reason why. Yes. The harm when the two are one and the same thing was seen, documented. History is strewn with examples.
Absolutely.
If it is clear in terms of the dangers that then are presented when you now have brought the two so closely together, if that is clear in terms of potential danger, then why do we see the continuance of this? If we are saying that members of the church leadership, who you speak of and said, how did church leadership sit and watch these things happening and not stand up and say, actually, this is wrong? If it is clear from a position of religious leadership that it is wrong, why do we see that it continues to perpetuate itself?
Well, history also mutates. History changes, whether it's the history of the church or of politics. And like in the history of Kenya, the main churches that you see playing an important role are what you'd call the mainstream. And maybe that's where we learned, hey, too far, too bad. Too close, too bad. So it's like we need one another, but let's be careful. Which is not just something that is practiced by religion and politics, but even human beings. There's fluidity in terms of relationships, but there is also boundaries that are important for people to coexist together. And I think that's the general. But now, with the growth of the evangelical one-man or a few people-led kind of congregations that are not regulated, that one divides into another, and within a short time, out of one congregation you have 100. Hello, that's where the main problem now becomes. How do we get to regulate these churches? Even in terms of their theology. You see, out of our experience, we have formed a theology. The stand you're talking about. We have formed a strong theology that is based on the experience that we have gained. And we have said, as mainstream churches, hey, be careful on this. But anyway, Kenya is a free nation. If people want to associate with the powers that are there, we let them enjoy the shine, but some of us will say no.
At what cost?
What cost of what? Of enjoying the shine?
No, at what cost to the people who follow this faith that we refer to as Christianity? At what cost to the lives of Kenyans who rely on the churches to be that buffer between them and wrongs that the state commits? Because the states tend to. That's why there's a check and balance.
They're inclined to.
Yes, they're inclined to. Power does strange things to people.
Yeah.
So there has to be that check and balance. Now, when you collude, then it means you've abrogated duty. And when you abrogate duty, there are consequences. Now, those consequences are the sufferings that we speak about.
But who are the beneficiaries of this trade between the church and the political leadership? Which commodity are they trading on? It is the members. And so you tend to see pastors who are very rich and very powerful, very close to the political powers, but their members are very poor and they have no voice. The church should actually call out on the government because there is tendency to be corrupted. But it's unfortunate when that same corruption now is in the church leadership. It becomes very dangerous. And that's, and I've argued elsewhere, that doesn't encourage growth of Christianity. Actually, many people become disillusioned about faith. But also, poverty. Kenyans cannot receive good services because of politicians can do without any question. I was somewhere last week, and I stood and I spoke on this subject that we are talking about today. And I could tell the church leadership there was very unhappy about me.
Why?
Not the political leadership, but the congregation were clapping. And I realized, the congregation have known the truth, that these religious leaders are not there to help them. They are there to benefit. And unfortunately, a lot of money has exchanged hands between the political leadership and religious leadership. And that's why, unfortunately, we can't be able to speak.
Eric, are we going on to a break?
Let's take that break. It's 28 minutes to 8. The very Reverend Canon Dr. Sammy Wainaina is the Provost of the All Saints Cathedral. He's our guest this morning. We are talking about the church and its duty to speak truth to power and its place in the society.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Continues with our guest, the very Reverend Canon Dr. Sammy Wainaina, Provost of the All Saints Cathedral. The church speaking truth to power. City, you wanted to say something before we took the break.
What I wanted to say was, when you talk about religion, the other religious groupings in this country that is significant in terms of numbers are the Muslims. In many cases, the sort of problems that we speak about with reference to the Christian churches, you will not necessarily find among the Muslims. Not really. If you ever go to a mosque, it's one of those places where you'll find enormous equality. There is a way in which they conduct their affairs, and there's a way in which they speak truth to those who are in positions of power from among their congregation. Because all these leaders we speak of, we are a predominantly Christian country. These people belong to churches. Not one church, the diversity of churches that exist in this country. So the opportunity for those who are in leadership within the church to speak to their congregants, not the leaders, you're a congregant when you're in church, it's enormous. But if they collude as opposed to providing the service that they are called to do, then this problem keeps rising. The fact that the check and balance that we speak of is not as evident as it ought to be, it tells you that they are not being told what they need to be told.
Well, it's the religious culture we have created.
Yes.
The Muslims, and it's good to look at Muslims beyond Kenya. They can also have their own chaos and problems. Religion is a religion. Every religion is regulation. Otherwise, it becomes abusive. But if you look at Kenya, the kind of culture we've created, it's a culture where politicians come to church to speak. And I keep asking them, there are people who have been members of the Cathedral for such a long time. Where do you get the right here to come and dictate or to say what you want? Even me as Provost, I don't just speak for the sake of speaking. I speak God's word. I respond to matters of society that are important. I don't just talk. There must be a regulation. But we've created such a bad culture that politicians misbehave in churches, but pastors are very happy. Pastors are very happy to entertain such people. Let's give credit where it's due. The former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, would come to All Saints. I would give him the podium to say hello, and he would only say hello. He never uttered a single word. And that's why whenever he came, I wouldn't be worried. Why? Because I know he doesn't even expect. There's no even protocol. It's me who would invite him. And he would say hello and say, I'm happy to worship here. But there are people, if you hear they are coming to church,
Shudder.
they will take away the church. But clergy have neglected their responsibility, whether it's responsibility, duty, or calling, to actually call out on these evils. Either we have become very fearful or we have been compromised so much that we are not able to speak. You know, what we need from government are not prayers. Prayers we will make, and we do make. What we need from government are services. When you hear a very senior government official saying that there are shares, there are some shares, and if you are found on the line, you can be asked to move
back
because you don't have shares. And it's not coming from somebody simple, it's coming from a number two. Then you actually know you are in real problems. Surely, as a clergy, with a congregation that is needy, would you be quiet about such a thing? So I keep asking, is it me who live in a different world where I observe things? Don't they see? Can't they talk about them? And some of them, if religious leaders who are close to that power can use their influence, they can be able to tell them, hello, please be careful with what you say in public. Because there is a lot of careless talk from our political leaders. Number two, we are away now from politics. You promised to deliver. Simply deliver. That is all about. Let's not sanitize or trying to make government religious so that we don't question them. If they said they are going to do something, they have manifestos that are in public. let them implement their manifestos. Otherwise, why did you ask us to elect you? And when you are elected, you're not just elected by a few people, you are elected as a president of the nation. Please serve Kenyans and give them a better life. We are all taxpayers, so we are shareholders of this country. And some people have no bigger share than the others. And simply political leadership or religious, it's servanthood. You are there for the sake of others.
But there are different layers of leaders, right? And when you talk about speaking truth to power, so we speak truth to power to the national executive. We also need to speak to power to the legislators who also have a mandate from the people and a job to do. Speak truth to governors, speak truth to MCAs. Do we do that?
Yes, it's across the board. The danger that you start seeing now in Parliament is buying off people so that you can have the majority. Well, that is okay. It weakens the opposition. And you can see the executive trying to influence Parliament, which is good yet very dangerous. Yet they are separate. Executive and Parliament, legislature are all separated. When you see a judiciary that seems to be under some control somewhere, you start questioning. I agree with you, Latif, that we must check everyone. But you see what? I'm not employed to go checking on the JDs of people and checking on their performance. There are checks and balances within that particular system that should be able to say, hey, you're not serving people. But we, from where I stand, we have very powerful governors, but they don't use their offices to serve the people. So the problem of leadership is not just executive. It is something that cuts across this country. And that is the effect of corruption. Corruption can affect those who are in political power or even religious. So I'm not exonerating religious leaders from any form of corruption. Yeah, and if we have chosen to be a corrupt nation, then we produce corrupt leaders. Everything then becomes chaotic that you cannot be able to change a nation.
You know, the strange thing about what we refer to as corruption is the insidious nature of it. It doesn't hit you in the face as the monster you see eventually. No, it starts with little compromises. You ignore this. You accommodate this.
Let this go.
You let this go. You let it slide. You tolerate this. And so with time, something that begins as a suggestion now becomes a full-blown lie. You've been accepting it in bits and pieces, so it isn't.
You'll swallow.
Yeah, you'll swallow and say, you've taken it in bits. And even when the very rights that you have are being abrogated, because you've been compromising, you don't actually see it as something big. And yet, the effects are already beginning to take place because you are in a position where you've been fully compromised. And the strange thing is you don't even know you've been compromised because you now accept and believe. And whatever it is that you're told now becomes something that you quite easily accept. Now, unfortunately, this is the mantra that has been sold with any great atrocity that this planet has seen. Whether it was the selling of communism, whether it was the selling of Nazism, it didn't start by someone telling you something that was outlandish. No. It was a small promise laden with lies, and it just goes along. By the time you realize the full-blown nature of it, the harm that has been done is profound.
It is actually in the system. It is in the Constitution.
Yes, it's everywhere.
Part of.
And what you've done is you've actually sold your soul, and you don't even realize.
Yeah, exactly.
The stories that people like giving examples of are the Rwandan genocide and the World War II atrocities committed by the Nazis. There's a book called Ordinary Men, written by a gentleman called Christopher Browning. He talks about ordinary police officers in Germany who were taken to Poland. when you hear of Auschwitz, when you hear of all these concentration camps, Poland had their fair share of it. Ordinary people, regular people who would tell right and wrong, and how gradually they slowly metamorphosize in this system, and they go to a point where they're the people who would drag pregnant women out in the street and shoot them in the head. But the ordinary people, how that system systematically, slowly corrupted them to the point where they could do something which, had they been asked at the time when they were going to Poland, they would have said they would never do such a thing, but they were doing it. It's ordinary people who commit these great atrocities. It is ordinary people who tell these outlandish lies. It's ordinary people. But the process that they go through now, the check and balance that the church provides is to put a halt to these promises and say, folks, we're heading in the wrong direction. Don't get there. This is where we need to go. Religious organizations, whatever faith it is, that's what they do. Because now that is now the moral duty.
Yeah.
It superintends everything else. You seem thoughtful.
I am. I'm just saying there's so many things that, there's so many things then that come into question when we're talking about then, moral duty and, position that the church has. I think it's interesting, Provost, that you said, look, government has no business doing certain things.
No.
Government leadership has no business doing certain things. Over the weekend, we saw that this whole conversation about LGBTQ, the homosexuality, again, has made its way back into mainstream conversation. What is the position? What are your thoughts? What are your sentiments about this? If, again, we are looking at, who should then lead the conversation when it comes to some of this?
I didn't know you were swing into that, although I suspected this was going to come. But City, you have actually brought it very nicely. It doesn't, any form of corruption, because even there's sexual corruption, it doesn't start with a big lie. It starts with small compromises here and there. By the time you realize, it is now part of your judicial system. Like now in Kenya, we used to talk about homosexuality as if it's a child play. Only then we could talk of what is happening in America and in Britain. And we thought it is very far away from us. What has happened now? The Supreme Court of Kenya has actually said they have the right to associate. I agree, they have the right to associate. But there are many other groups that cannot be registered. For example, if
Association of Axe Murderers.
Perverts, all manner of perverts. Why don't we register them then and give them the right? And now what will happen? While I agree they have the right to associate, and I know they are in our communities, even in our churches, gay, lesbian, they are there. What now will happen? Because now they are becoming a minority. And very soon you'll hear them pushing for recognition in Parliament and other constitutional bodies. It will become slowly. But now, with the NGO money, with the influence from the West, it is likely to take root quicker. Again, with the social media, within few years, you are likely to see Kenya gone. Now in South. Oh yeah.
What does gone mean?
It will mean.
Sounds like you're saying it's lost.
Okay, lost or gone are the same things. But what I mean here is it will become regular, it will become normalized, and it will be part of the system.
And that is wrong, Provost?
It is.
Why?
It is. Sexuality is a very sensitive and divisive issue. And I know if we start talking about it here, we will not finish because all of us have our own views. But if you want me to talk from a religious point of view, it is true all human beings are created in the image of God. Gay, heterosexual, or bisexual, all of us are created in the image of God. But also, there are certain things that God says no to. And you don't need to dig a lot in the Bible to actually find that actually it's an abomination. And the Bible is straightforward. In fact, it's not, you can't guess. It is like straight. A man, if you look at Leviticus, if you look even Romans chapter 1, it is straight that when people become rebellious from God, then God gives them to unnatural practices. So it's like God saying, now then, have it, but it comes at this cost. So from a biblical point of view, homosexuality is actually a sin, and it's a dangerous one, and it doesn't build a society. It actually destroys them. Unfortunately, sometimes the church thinks if we become very accommodative, the same culture of corrupting things slowly, that the world or the secular will come to church. What has happened in the developed nations where the church compromised, they lost even the secular. They can't come. Why? There is no difference between church and the secular world. And so now what happened in Kenya last week was actually very dangerous. But I want to believe that the power of the Constitution is actually given to the Kenyans. It is Kenyans to decide.
To make the decision.
If we want that to happen, we shall become.
Provost, it sounds to me that you acknowledge the presence of the LGBTQ, but you're opposed to the recognition of the LGBTQ.
By the way, remember I'm a pastor, and my work is pastoral. So I deal with human beings. To sit here and deny, it would be very sad of me, because I meet them, I love them, I care about them. And I have even helped some who are either introduced to this. And by the way, there are people born with certain conditions which could be medical and they can be corrected medically. But most of these people, and most of the people that I've met, almost 100%, there are many gates that this behavior can use. Either it is a behavioral, either it is something that somebody is missing because of the nature of families they grow up in. Maybe it's high school, introduction slowly, and it becomes a behavior, and people can be helped. But we need to receive them with love and help them. But to tell them that God loves that sin, no, God loves the sinner. He doesn't love the sin. And by the way, you don't become a greater sinner when you are homosexual than when you are heterosexual.
Have you been able to help
all form
one who has
of
come
sin
to you as a homosexual?
Yes, I have.
And you've helped them to become
Yes, I have. But it requires help beyond a clergy. Because you need a psychologist, a psychiatrist, because these are behaviors that have permeated every part of that human being. So it's like you need to do some rewiring of that particular person.
And you're saying, Provost, that you've actually seen it happen.
It has. There are many people. Again, there is power in God. We can be able to help people, pray over them over time through counseling, and they can seek help. But it must start from them accepting that there is a challenge here that needs to be addressed.
Your mother church, the Church of England, you know, of course, first of all, it allowed for same-sex marriage. It allowed for gay priests. Now there's that whole consideration of even the gender of God. And the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya immediately wrote a statement and said, we reject that. So is there anything that the Church of Kenya is actually doing to safeguard the church and its congregants from that influence?
By the way, there's need for correction. What happened in the Church of England, was it last month now?
Yeah.
They didn't approve marriage of...
Same-sex marriage.
Same-sex. They didn't. And that, I've read it everywhere. That was not true.
Okay.
They actually upheld the canon of marriage between husband and wife in a long-term relationship. Heterosexual.
Okay.
But what they did, they were kind of sympathetic to people who are in relationships and they are in church, and they were talking of the blessing, and they had their own debate. And what I've said again in public is, while I do not support at all same-sex union, what I saw in England that time is a church discussing their socio-cultural problems and trying to find a solution. Does the church in Kenya sit down, debate on the socio-cultural problems that we have? And so if there's anything that I would carry from there, it's not about homosexuality. It's about a church that is responsive, proactive to the challenges of society. Now, how do you help people? And what is the church doing? And let me talk directly. Number one is to give info. Number two, it is to continuously invite people who need help to come.
Those two.
And there could be more if I had time.
The very Reverend Canon Dr. Sammy Wainaina has been our guest this morning, talking about the church and its duty of speaking truth to power.